I should have known something was off the moment I stepped through the front door. The living room was in disarray, couch cushions tossed carelessly aside, and the contents of the bookshelf strewn across the floor. A cold dread washed over me as I rushed upstairs to my bedroom. The sight that greeted me made my heart sink. Drawers hung open, clothes spilling out haphazardly. My jewelry box lay overturned on the dresser, its contents scattered like a kaleidoscope of broken dreams. "Paul!" I shouted, my voice trembling with panic. "Get up here now!" Moments later, my husband appeared in the doorway, his expression unnervingly calm. "What's going on?" I gestured wildly at the chaos surrounding us. "What does it look like? We've been robbed." Paul surveyed the scene with an infuriatingly casual demeanor. "Are you sure? Maybe you just misplaced some things." Anger flared within me as I knelt beside the jumbled mess of jewelry. My fingers frantically sifted through the tangle of chains and pendants, but the one item I desperately sought remained elusive. "It's gone," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. My grandmother's necklace is gone. The vintage diamond piece had been a cherished heirloom passed down through generations. More than mere jewels, it embodied the love and resilience of the remarkable woman who had raised me. Paul's voice cut through my anguish. "I'm sure it's around here somewhere. Don't worry, we'll find it." I whirled on him, disbelief and anger contorting my features. "How can you be so calm about this? That necklace is priceless to me." He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Kristen, getting upset won't solve anything. Let's just retrace our steps and look for it calmly." But I knew, deep down, that the necklace wasn't simply misplaced. Someone had taken it, stolen a piece of my family's legacy right from under our noses. And as the sickening realization set in, a single name echoed through my mind, one I desperately hoped wasn't behind this violation. Janice. That necklace meant everything to me. More than just diamonds and gold, it was a connection to the woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own. After my parents died in that terrible car accident when I was 8 years old, it was Grandma Rose who took me in and gave me a real home. While other kids my age were playing make-believe, I was learning how to cook, clean, and fend for myself. Grandma never coddled me, but she loved me fiercely in her own way. "Life ain't always pretty, baby girl," she'd say in her thick southern drawl. "But if you got grit and grace, you can make it through any storm." Those words became my mantra, a lifeline I clung to during the darkest days. Because even when the bills piled up and the fridge ran empty, Grandma Rose never lost her unshakable spirit. She worked tirelessly as a seamstress, her calloused fingers deftly guiding the needle and thread. I can still picture her hunched over that old Singer sewing machine, the whirring rhythmic as she brought fabric to life. It was during those long nights, as I drifted off to the comforting hum of the machine, that Grandma would tell me about the necklace. "This here's been in our family for generations," she'd say, her weathered hands cradling the glittering gems. "Passed down from mother to daughter as a reminder of our strength and resilience." To Grandma, those diamonds represented more than just wealth. They were a testament to the sacrifices and perseverance of the women who came before us. With each delicate link in the chain, she wove the tales of our ancestors' triumphs and struggles, binding me to a legacy of unbreakable spirit. "One day this'll be yours, baby girl," Grandma would whisper, "a piece of our history to carry with you always." Those words echoed through my mind as I knelt amid the wreckage of my bedroom, the vacant space where the necklace once rested mocking me. Grandma had trusted me to safeguard our family's heirloom, and I had failed her. "We have to call the police," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and determination. Paul shook his head, his brow furrowed with concern. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Kristen. For all we know, you just misplaced it somewhere." I fixed him with a steely glare, my hands balling into fists at my sides. How could he be so blasé about this? Didn't he understand the profound significance of what had been taken? "You think I'd just carelessly lose something that important?" I snapped. "No, Paul. Someone took it. Someone who knew exactly what that necklace meant to me." As the terrible realization settled over me, a singular name burned like acid on my tongue. The one person I knew was capable of such a heartless act, the one who had always resented my bond with Grandma Rose. Janice. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that Janice's love comes with a steep price, and I was never willing to pay it. From the moment Paul and I started dating, his mother made it abundantly clear that I would never be good enough in her eyes. A girl with no family and no money? She'd sneer, her thin lips curling into a disdainful sneer. Is that really the best you can do, Paul? Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. I had survived far worse than a disapproving mother-in-law, even one as venomous as Janice. Unfortunately, Paul was never able to break free from her toxic grip. Despite my pleading, he remained her obedient little boy, jumping at her every whim and demand. She's just looking out for me, he'd insist, his eyes downcast with shame. You know how worried she gets. I knew better than to argue. Janice had him wrapped around her bony finger, and any attempt to sever that twisted bond would only push him further into her clutches. So I suffered in silence, enduring her endless criticisms and backhanded insults. I was too messy, too loud, too opinionated, a constant disappointment in her eyes. But it was the underhanded digs at my humble upbringing that cut deepest of all. I still can't believe Paul married a girl raised by some old seamstress, she'd sneer, her gaze boring into me with undisguised disdain. He deserves so much better than that. It took every ounce of willpower not to slap that smug expression right off her face. How dare she disrespect the woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a chance at life? Grandma Rose was worth 1,000 of Janice, a true pillar of strength and grace in the face of adversity. While Janice wallowed in her wealth and privilege, Grandma had clawed her way out of poverty with nothing but her calloused hands and an indomitable spirit. The necklace had been her final gift to me, a symbolic passing of the torch from one strong woman to another. And now, thanks to Janice's greed and pettiness, that precious heirloom was gone forever. I could feel the anger simmering within me, a white-hot rage that threatened to boil over. Paul might have been content to let his mother trample all over our lives, but I refused to be her doormat any longer. We're calling the police, I stated firmly, leaving no room for argument. And if you won't stand up to your mother, then I'll handle this myself. Paul's eyes widened in alarm, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Kristen, you can't be serious. It's just a necklace, for God's sake. Just a necklace. How could he be so callous, so dismissive of something that meant the world to me? It's more than just a necklace, Paul, I said, my voice low and trembling with barely restrained fury. It's my heritage, my connection to the woman who made me who I am today. And if you can't see that, if you're willing to let your mother stomp all over that, then maybe we have bigger problems than a missing piece of jewelry. As the words left my lips, I realized they carried a weight far beyond this single act of betrayal. This was about taking a stand, about refusing to let Janice's toxicity poison our lives any longer. If Paul wouldn't fight for me, for us, then I would have to fight for myself. I should have known better than to hope for a moment's peace. Not when Janice was involved. The woman had a sixth sense for sniffing out drama, and my confrontation with Paul must have set off her internal chaos detector. Less than 24 hours after our heated argument, the doorbell rang with that all-too-familiar cadence. 3 sharp trills like a queen announcing her arrival. "I'll get it," Paul called out, his voice laced with a mixture of resignation and dread. But I was already making my way to the front door, steeling myself for the inevitable storm that was about to blow through our home. Sure enough, when I pulled it open, there she stood, Janice in all her designer-clad glory. "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" she demanded, brushing past me without waiting for a response. I bit back the acidic retort that danced on the tip of my tongue. Engaging with Janice was like fanning the flames of a wildfire. The more oxygen you gave her, the more she burned. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I asked instead, my voice taut with forced politeness. Janice made a show of looking around the living room, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "Good Lord, Kristen, this place is a sty. Haven't you heard of dusting?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Paul cut me off with a nervous chuckle. Now, Mother, you know Kristen works hard to keep everything tidy." Clearly not hard enough, Janice sniffed, casting a disdainful glance in my direction. The urge to throttle her was becoming overwhelming, but I managed a tight smile. "I'll get us some coffee." As I retreated to the kitchen, I could hear Janice's shrill voice carrying through the house. Honestly, Paul, I don't know how you put up with her. You could do so much better, you know? My hands trembled with barely restrained rage as I fumbled with the coffee mugs. How dare she speak about me like that, as if I were some sort of burden to be endured? By the time I returned to the living room, Janice had made herself quite at home, her bony frame perched on the edge of the sofa like a vulture surveying its prey. Paul sat in the armchair across from her, his shoulders hunched and his gaze averted. "There you are," Janice said, fixing me with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "I was just telling Paul how lovely it would be if we could have a proper family dinner this weekend. You know, a chance for us to catch up and spend some quality time together." The words oozed from her mouth like poisoned honey, and I felt my stomach churn with dread. A family dinner with Janice was akin to a medieval torture session, 2 hours of endless needling and criticism, all while forcing hollow smiles. "That sounds lovely," I lied through gritted teeth, setting the coffee tray down with more force than intended. Janice's gaze drifted to the disarray of my jewelry box, still scattered across the dresser top. "Good heavens, Kristen, what happened here? It looks like a tornado blew through." A familiar prickle of unease crept up my spine as her beady eyes raked over the jumbled mess of chains and pendants. Surely she couldn't know, could she? "Actually, we think we were robbed yesterday," Paul piped up, shooting me a nervous glance. "Some things went missing, including that tacky old necklace of Kristen's," Janice interjected with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The one from her grandmother, right?" The casual way she spoke of the necklace, as if it were little more than a worthless bauble, sent a spike of white-hot fury through my veins. "You know about the missing necklace?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Janice met my gaze with an infuriatingly bland expression. "Of course, dear. Paul mentioned it when I arrived." But her eyes, those soulless pits, betrayed something else entirely. A flicker of smugness, of twisted satisfaction at my pain. In that moment, I knew the truth with every fiber of my being. The necklace hadn't been taken by some random thief. It had been stolen by the very woman sitting before me, the one who had always resented and envied my bond with Grandma Rose. "You." The word caught in my throat, rage and disbelief rendering me momentarily speechless. Janice merely arched one perfectly groomed eyebrow, her thin lips curving into a serpentine smile. "Me?" she purred, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Why, Kristen? Whatever do you mean?" The silence that followed Janice's thinly veiled taunt was deafening, a vacuum of tension that threatened to swallow us whole. I could feel Paul's worried gaze boring into me, silently pleading for me to let it go, to keep the peace. But how could I? How could I possibly sit idly by while this vile woman not only stole from me, but mocked me to my face? "You know exactly what I mean," I growled, my fingers curling into white-knuckled fists at my sides. "That necklace was priceless to me, and you took it out of pure spite." Janice's eyes widened in a parody of innocence, her perfectly manicured hand fluttering to her chest. "Why, Kristen, I'm absolutely appalled that you would accuse me of such a thing. I may have my faults, but theft? Really, dear, you're being quite dramatic." The sickly sweet condescension in her tone was like acid on an open wound. I wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug, self-satisfied smirk off her face once and for all. "Don't play dumb with me, Janice," I spat, taking a step closer to her perch on the sofa. "We both know you've had it out for me from the start. That necklace was my connection to Grandma Rose, and you couldn't stand the fact that she loved me more than you." A flicker of something dark and ugly passed over Janice's features, her carefully cultivated mask of gentility slipping for the briefest of moments. Ah, there it was, the jealousy and resentment that had festered like an open wound for all these years. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a low venomous rasp. "That old crone may have doted on you, but she was nothing more than a common seamstress, certainly not the kind of influence a young woman of means should have in her life." "Mother, please." Paul's timid voice cut through the tension, but I barely heard him. All I could focus on was the white-hot rage coursing through my veins, the urge to lash out and make Janice pay for her cruelty. How dare she speak of Grandma Rose with such disrespect? The woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a chance at life, who had instilled in me the values of strength and resilience that her own daughter so sorely lacked. "You're wrong," I said, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "Grandma Rose was worth 1,000 of you. She may not have had money or status, but she had integrity and heart. 2 things you'll never understand, you miserable, spiteful hag." The words tumbled from my lips in a torrent of pent-up rage, each one a dagger aimed at the heart of Janice's fragile ego. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of something akin to hurt flash across her features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that infuriatingly smug sneer. "Well, well," she clucked, shaking her head in mock disappointment. Such language from the woman who claims to have been raised with manners and grace, although I suppose we can't expect much from someone of your background. The thinly veiled dig at my humble upbringing was the final straw. I opened my mouth to unleash a fresh volley of vitriol, but Paul's voice cut through the haze of fury like a bucket of ice water. "Enough," he shouted, surging to his feet and planting himself between Janice and me. "I won't have the 2 of you going at each other like this, not in my own home." I recoiled as if he had struck me, stunned by the rare display of backbone from my typically docile husband. For once, the mask of the obedient son had slipped, revealing a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with. Strong, decisive, and unwilling to be cowed by his mother's manipulations. But as quickly as that spark of defiance had ignited, it faded, extinguished by the weight of years of conditioning and emotional subjugation. "Mother's right," he said, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "This has gone too far. The necklace is just a material possession, and accusing her of stealing it is unacceptable." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my tongue as I watched him turn to face Janice, his expression a mask of shame and contrition. "I'm so sorry you had to endure such disrespect, Mother," he murmured, his voice thick with remorse. "It won't happen again, I promise." As he wrapped his arm around her bony shoulders in a gesture of misguided filial devotion, I felt something inside me shatter. In that moment, I realized with gut-wrenching clarity that Paul would never truly be on my side, not when it came to his mother. No matter how much she belittled me, no matter how far she took her cruelty, he would always choose her in the end. And as I watched them embrace, united in their twisted, toxic bond, I knew that if I wanted justice for what Janice had done, I would have to take matters into my own hands. The drive up to the lake house should have been a peaceful respite, a chance to escape the suffocating tension that had engulfed our home. But as Paul and I navigated the winding roads in silence, the weight of unspoken accusations hung heavy in the air between us. It had been 3 days since my explosive confrontation with Janice, 3 days of simmering resentment and bitter silence. Paul had made it abundantly clear where his loyalties lay, choosing to bury his head in the sand rather than acknowledge his mother's despicable actions. As for me, I was done playing the role of the dutiful, long-suffering wife. Grandma Rose hadn't raised me to be a doormat, and I refused to let Janice trample all over her legacy any longer. The proof I needed had arrived in the form of a nondescript envelope, slipped unceremoniously through the mail slot 2 days ago. Inside was a single piece of paper, a pawn shop receipt detailing the sale of a vintage diamond necklace, the very one that had been stolen from my home. I had pored over the document obsessively, my fingers tracing the damning evidence of Janice's betrayal. The date, the description, even the listed seller's name. It all added up to an undeniable truth that Paul refused to accept. His mother was a thief, a vindictive snake who would stop at nothing to hurt me, to sever my connection to the woman she had always envied and resented. But this time, I wouldn't let her win. This time I would make her pay. The plan had been forming in my mind for days, a slow burn of righteous fury and calculated revenge. And as we pulled up to the secluded lake house, the final pieces clicked into place. "Isn't this nice?" Paul ventured, his voice tentative as he killed the engine. A whole weekend away, just the 2 of us. I forced a tight smile, willing my features into a mask of forced calm. "Yes, it'll be wonderful to get away from everything." His brow furrowed slightly at my pointed emphasis, but he didn't press the issue. Typical Paul, always eager to avoid confrontation, even when it was long overdue. We unpacked in silence, the tension between us a living, breathing thing. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, I made my move. "I'm going to take a walk down by the water," I announced, already heading for the door. "Clear my head a bit." Paul hesitated, his mouth opening as if to protest, but I was already gone, the screen door slamming shut behind me. The pawn shop was a hole-in-the-wall establishment on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that dealt in discretion as much as merchandise. Perfect for someone like Janice, who valued her reputation above all else. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside, and a wiry man with beady eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he drawled, his gaze raking over me with poorly veiled suspicion. I steeled my nerves and met his stare head-on, reaching into my pocket for the crumpled receipt. "I'm looking for a necklace that was sold here recently," I said, sliding the paper across the glass countertop. "A vintage diamond piece, according to this receipt." The man's eyes narrowed as he scanned the document, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment I feared he would refuse to cooperate, that my carefully laid plans would unravel before they could even begin. But then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah, I remember this one," he grunted, disappearing into the back room. My heart thundered in my chest as I waited, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally he reappeared, a velvet pouch clutched in his gnarled hand. "Here it is," he said gruffly, upending the pouch onto the counter. There it was, Grandma Rose's necklace, the delicate chains and glittering diamonds that had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. A piece of my heritage, my connection to the woman who had made me who I was. And it had taken everything in me not to snatch it up right then and there, to clutch it to my chest and never let it go again. But I couldn't, not yet. Not until I had made Janice pay for what she had done. "I'll take it," I said, my voice steady despite the maelstrom of emotions swirling within me. The pawnbroker eyed me warily, no doubt sensing the barely contained fury simmering beneath my calm exterior. "You sure about that, lady?" he asked, his gaze flickering to the receipt once more. "'Cause according to this, that necklace don't belong to you." I leaned forward, holding his gaze with every ounce of steely determination I possessed. "It belongs to me," I said, each word dripping with conviction. "And I'll do whatever it takes to get it back." The drive back to the lake house was a blur, my mind whirling with the weight of what I had just done. The necklace burned a hole in my pocket, a constant reminder of the line I was about to cross, and just how far I was willing to go to make Janice pay. Paul was already asleep when I slipped back inside, his soft snores drifting from the bedroom. Good, the fewer questions the better. I needed him as far removed from this as possible, both for his own sake and mine. With trembling hands, I retrieved the velvet pouch from my jacket and carefully upended it onto the kitchen counter. There it was, the diamonds winking at me in the dim light, a silent taunt, daring me to go through with my plan. I traced the delicate links with the pad of my finger, steeling my resolve. This was about more than just a piece of jewelry. It was about righting a wrong, about standing up to the toxic force that had plagued my life for far too long. Janice had started this game, and now it was time for me to finish it, on my terms. The rest of the night passed in a flurry of activity, each meticulous step etched into my memory with razor-sharp clarity. The supplies gathered, the plan set in motion, every contingency accounted for. By the time the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, I was ready. The drive into town was a silent one, the radio purposefully muted as I navigated the deserted streets. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, my heart thundering in my ears like a caged animal desperate to be set free. Finally, I pulled up to the familiar suburban house, its manicured lawn and pristine exterior a carefully cultivated facade, just like the woman who dwelled within. I killed the engine and sat in silence for a long moment, watching as the curtains in the upstairs window twitched ever so slightly. She was awake, no doubt already planning her next round of manipulations and petty cruelties. Well, not today. With a deep, steadying breath, I slipped from the car and made my way up the immaculate path to the front door. The necklace was a reassuring weight in my pocket, a talisman of sorts, a reminder of why I was here, of the justice I sought. The doorbell echoed through the cavernous foyer like a death knell, and I could practically feel Janice's confusion and disdain radiating from the other side of the door. Who in the world? Her shrill voice carried, growing closer with each clipped footfall. The moment stretched into an eternity as the lock clicked and the door swung open, revealing Janice in all her silk-robed glory. Her perfectly coiffed hair was mussed, her face devoid of makeup, a rare glimpse of vulnerability that would soon be shattered. "Kristen," she sneered, her brow furrowing in distaste. "What on earth are you doing here at this hour? And without Paul, no less?" I said nothing, merely reached into my pocket and withdrew the necklace, letting the delicate chains pool in my upturned palm. Janice's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. For a fleeting moment, I saw the mask slip, revealing the petty, grasping creature that lurked beneath. "Where did you get that?" she hissed, her gaze darting furtively left and right, as if afraid someone might overhear. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face as I drank in her discomfort, her sudden loss of control. "From the pawn shop," I said, my voice low and laced with triumph. "The same one you sold it to after you stole it from my home." Janice recoiled as if I had struck her, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her mouth in a parody of shock. "I did no such thing," she sputtered, her eyes wide and wild. "How dare you accuse me?" "Save it, Janice," I cut her off, taking a step closer. "I have proof. The receipt, the dates, it all lines up. You took the one thing that meant everything to me out of pure spite and jealousy." For a moment, she seemed to waver, her bravado cracking under the weight of my accusations. But then, like a switch being flipped, that familiar mask of haughty disdain slammed back into place. "Well, well," she sneered, tossing her head with a derisive sniff. "It seems someone has developed quite the flair for the dramatic. Tell me, Kristen, did your darling grandmother teach you those theatrics? Or did you simply inherit her penchant for making a spectacle of yourself?" The barb hit its mark, a white-hot flare of rage licking at my insides. How dare she drag Grandma Rose into this, using her memory as a weapon against me? But I refused to take the bait, to let her goad me into an emotional outburst that would only feed her twisted sense of superiority. Instead, I simply smiled, a slow, predatory curl of the lips that made Janice's eyes narrow with sudden uncertainty. "You're right, Janice," I purred, taking another deliberate step forward. "I did inherit something from my grandmother." I was close enough now to see the flicker of unease in her gaze, the slightest chink in her armor of smug self-assurance. "Her strength," I continued, my voice a low, dangerous rasp. "Her resilience. Her refusal to let petty, vindictive people like you grind her down." Janice opened her mouth, no doubt, to deliver a scathing retort, but I didn't give her the chance. In one fluid motion, I reached out and grabbed a fistful of her silk robe, yanking her forward with a strength that belied my slight frame. "So you can keep your money, your status, your pathetic delusions of grandeur," I hissed, our faces mere inches apart. "Because at the end of the day, I have something far more valuable, the knowledge that I am a better woman than you could ever hope to be." With that, I released her, letting her stagger back in a flurry of ruffled silk and indignant sputtering. But I was already turning away, the necklace clutched in my hand like a victor's spoils. As I strode back down the path toward my car, Janice's outraged shrieks followed me like a bitter requiem. "You'll regret this, Kristen. Do you hear me? You haven't seen the last of me." But her threats fell on deaf ears. Because in that moment, as the morning sun crested over the rooftops and bathed me in its warm glow, I knew that I had already won. Janice might have money and status, but I had something far more precious. The strength of my convictions, the knowledge that I had stood up for what was right. And as the necklace glittered in the light, a piece of my heritage restored, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The calm that comes with knowing you have honored the legacy of those who came before. Grandma Rose would have been proud. The aftermath of my confrontation with Janice was like a whirlwind, a maelstrom of emotions and consequences that threatened to sweep me away. As I pulled up to the lake house, necklace clutched tightly in my trembling hand, a part of me half expected Paul to be waiting on the porch, suitcase in hand, and recriminations on his lips. But when I stepped through the door, the living room was empty, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had decided to take my side for once. That illusion was swiftly shattered by the sound of his voice drifting in from the kitchen. Absolutely unacceptable, Mother. I don't care what she said or did. That kind of behavior is inexcusable. My heart sank as I rounded the corner to find him pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. Of course he was talking to Janice, no doubt being regaled with her twisted version of events. Paul's eyes went wide when he saw me, his mouth snapping shut with an audible click. "I have to go," he muttered into the receiver, never taking his gaze off me. "We'll discuss this later." The heavy silence that followed was suffocating, a palpable weight that threatened to crush us both. I could see the questions swirling in Paul's eyes, the desperate need for an explanation warring with his deeply ingrained instinct to avoid confrontation. Finally, he spoke. What happened? Such a simple question, and yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. I could have lied, could have downplayed the events of the morning and tried to smooth things over. But I was done with lies, done with tiptoeing around Janice's fragile ego and toxic manipulations. "I got the necklace back," I said simply, holding it up for him to see, "from the pawn shop where your mother sold it after she stole it from our home." Paul's brow furrowed, his mouth working soundlessly for a moment as he processed my words. That's not possible," he finally managed, shaking his head vehemently. "Mother would never do something like that. She's not a thief, Kristen." The blind devotion in his voice, the utter refusal to even entertain the possibility that his precious mother could be anything less than perfect, was like a physical blow. "Open your eyes, Paul," I exploded, unable to contain my frustration any longer. "I have proof, the receipt, the dates, everything. She took that necklace out of pure spite because she knew how much it meant to me." "No," Paul whispered, his face ashen. "No, you're wrong. You have to be." In that moment, I realized that no amount of evidence would ever be enough to sway him. Janice had him so thoroughly brainwashed, so twisted up in her web of lies and manipulation, that he would always take her side, no matter how despicable her actions. And as that painful truth sank in, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Because for the first time I saw Paul for what he truly was, a weak, spineless man so crippled by his mother's toxicity that he would never be able to fully commit to me, to our marriage. "You know what?" I said, my voice low and laced with resignation. "Believe what you want, Paul. But I'm done walking on eggshells around your mother. I'm done letting her treat me like garbage and disrespect everything I hold dear." I took a step closer, holding his gaze with every ounce of steely determination I possessed. "This necklace represents more than just diamonds and gold. It's a symbol of the strength and resilience that Grandma Rose instilled in me. The same strength that let me stand up to your mother and take back what was rightfully mine." Paul opened his mouth, no doubt to protest or make excuses, but I didn't give him the chance. "So you can keep making apologies for her, keep turning a blind eye to her cruelty and pettiness, but I refuse to be a part of that toxic cycle any longer. Not when it means sacrificing my self-respect and the legacy my grandmother fought so hard to give me." The words hung heavy in the air, a gauntlet thrown down between us. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of my ultimatum stretching out in the silence. Finally, Paul's shoulders slumped in defeat, and I saw the flicker of the man I had once loved extinguish in his eyes. "If that's how you really feel," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I said nothing, merely turned and headed for the door, the necklace clutched tightly in my fist. As I stepped out onto the porch, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. Paul was still standing in the kitchen, his back to me and his head bowed in resignation. A part of me ached to go to him, to find a way to make things right, but I knew deep down that it was too late for that. The ties that bound him to his mother were too strong, too deeply ingrained to ever be severed. So I did the only thing I could. I kept walking, letting the screen door slam shut behind me with a finality that reverberated in my soul. As I made my way to the car, the morning sun glinting off the diamonds in my hand, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace amidst the turmoil. Because for the first time in my life, I was truly free, free from Janice's toxic grip, free from the burden of trying to please a woman who would never be satisfied. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure, but as I clutched the necklace to my chest, I knew that Grandma Rose would have understood. She, too, had walked away from situations that threatened to diminish her spirit, her sense of self-worth. And in that moment, as I turned to face an uncertain future, I knew that her strength, her resilience, flowed through my veins like a wellspring of courage and determination. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, unbowed and unbroken. Because that was the legacy she had passed down to me. A legacy far more precious than any diamond or jewel. A legacy of grace under fire, of dignity in the face of adversity. And for the first time in far too long, I felt truly worthy of carrying that mantle.